The morning began with a sky the color of unspun wool and a wind that smelled like pennies. Kestrel Ward tightened the knot on her niece's scarf and told herself not to shake, because Ileana would feel it through the small ones of her throat. The town was already awake, trash trucks yawning, a bakery door clanging like a loose cymbal, metallic laughter ricocheting off the damp brick of Rooker Street. Ileana, 12 years old, chin nicked from last night's nervous shaving at the bathroom sink, clutched a bouquet of supermarket daisies that made her look like a candle trying to hold its flame against the weather. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. They had a plan: walk the 6 blocks from Kestrel's apartment to the cemetery, lay the flowers, say the names that hurt to say, and leave before the town could decide whether grief was gossip or a spectacle. Kestrel believed in simple plans, the kind you could fold into your pocket without tearing the paper. But grief, like wind, took its own roads. A pair of teenagers outside the vape shop elbowed each other when they saw the daisies. The taller one with a freckled jaw snorted. "Funeral cosplay," he said too loudly, as if humor were a shield he could polish in public. The other boy laughed the brittle laugh of someone who has never been alone in a courtroom hallway. Ileana's hand tightened around the stems until one green straw snapped with a wet click. She didn't look up to find the boys. She kept her eyes on the pavement gaps where rainwater collected and tiny galaxies of oil shimmered. Kestrel felt sudden heat in her chest that had nothing to do with the weather. Not righteous anger, something colder, like a blade resting flat along the sternum. It was the old instinct from her ambulance days before she'd left the county service: scan, triage, decide. Protect the airway, stop the bleeding, get them out of danger. "Keep walking," she murmured, and Ileana nodded. The girl's ponytail moved like a metronome ticking time Kestrel wished she could slow. They turned the corner onto Willow, where the houses sat low and sincere, built when porches were still a form of conversation. 2 doors down, a woman watering petunias paused the arc of her hostess stare, not in sympathy. Kestrel could read the eyes, but with the curiosity people reserve for wrecks that happen to strangers. "Morning," Kestrel said anyway, the word clipped to hide the tremble. The woman didn't answer. She shifted her hose and let the water drum against the sidewalk until the runoff slurried cigarette butts toward the gutter. The cemetery gates waited at the far end of the street, black iron worked into a filigree of willow leaves and names of benefactors whose descendants now parked illegally during high school football games. Beyond the gates, weathered stones leaned like tired teeth. The older plots were raised, earth swelling gently over bones, while the newer ones lay flat as if the ground had been ironed. Kestrel had been here twice in the past year. Once for her sister's hearing, when a volunteer from the church hosted a prayer circle beside the azaleas and no number of candles could cauterize what had already been cut. Once to sit on the bench by the oldest oak, the one that dropped acorns like small fists on the heads of people who didn't look up. "Do you want to practice?" Kestrel asked now, the way a medic might ask a driver to inhale before the needle. Ileana shook her head. Her lips were chapped. She licked them and left a shine that looked like she'd tried on her mother's lip gloss by mistake. "I know what I'll say," she whispered. The wind carried the new sound of a scooter on the next block and the old sound of someone's screen door complaining about its hinges. The teenagers had not followed, but the laughter they'd left behind had. It trailed like a phone ringtone that no one reached to silence. Kestrel had called 3 numbers last night. First, the sheriff's office, to ask whether there would be a patrol near the cemetery gates around noon. The deputy on the phone had sounded young enough to still believe that policy was a noun you could rest a whole sentence on. "We can't assign a unit," he said, "but we'll have cars in the area." Second, Pastor Wilhelm, who had held Ileana's small hand through the longest afternoon of the custody hearing last winter and whose own son had gone to college with a scar on his cheek he never explained. He promised to meet them if the Lord allowed, which sometimes meant yes and sometimes meant his bad knee, and Kestrel had learned to stop translating other people's maybes. The third call had required a different kind of breath. She scrolled to the contact she'd saved months ago when the counselors had given her a stack of pamphlets with their phone numbers printed in embargoed ink. She hadn't been ready then. Last night she was. She called BACA, Bikers Against Child Abuse, and a woman named Cricket answered. Cricket, like the bug, the woman said, kindly saving Kestrel the embarrassment of asking. How can we help? Kestrel described the laughter, the whispering, the way the town had turned this child into a rumor for moving through it. She described a man she did not name, because names had power, and said there was a chance he might be at the cemetery today, or one of his friends, and that her niece wanted to lay flowers without being watched like a headline. We ride for that, Cricket said, no hesitation. We ride so she doesn't walk alone. Now, on Willow Street, Kestrel heard what silence becomes when it is broken by arrival, a bass note inside the chest before the ears catch up. Not a roar. Not yet. An approaching promise. She glanced over her shoulder and saw them turn from Copper Avenue onto Willow in a long orchestrated curve like a river deciding on a new bank. The first bike wore matte black like something holy. Its rider, leather vest, a patch that read Guardian, lifted 2 fingers from his handlebar, a greeting that wasn't a wave, exactly, but felt like one. Ileana stopped. She squeezed the flowers with both hands and looked at Kestrel as if to ask whether they were allowed to accept such a thing. Kestrel didn't know what the proper etiquette was when 80 motorcycles made themselves into quiet. She only knew what relief felt like when it arrived outside of an ambulance. 2 riders slowed to match their pace, one on either side of the sidewalk, engines thumping like huge calm hearts. Behind them, 2 more. And behind those, more still, until Willow Street looked less like a road and more like 2 dark rivers flanking a small boat. Helmets gleamed. Patches flashed, First Family. Road Captain. Sentinel. Kestrel caught a name stitched in gold, Sable. She liked the sound of it, steady, like the promise of a fence that would hold. The freckled boy from the vape shop had followed after all, his brittle laugh caught like gum on shoe soles. He and his friend slowed when they saw the bikes and tried to rearrange their faces into something that wasn't fear. The BACA riders did not look at them. They looked only at Ileana, the way medical students are taught to look only at the patient and not the people who try to narrate the appointment. A rider in a white half-helmet eased forward until his bike matched the cadence of Ileana's sneakers. He raised his visor. His eyes were green and kind and a little embarrassed to be kind. You must be Eiley, he said, careful to pronounce it the way Cricket had told him on the phone. I'm Ledger. We'll ride at your pace. He pointed to the bouquet with a hand that had seen a grinding wheel and a guitar string. Those are good flowers. They'll know they're loved. Ileana nodded, words crowded in her throat with the petals. When she looked left at Ledger and then right at Sable, the corners of her mouth lifted, not a smile, not yet, but the muscle memory of one. They took the last half block together like a procession that had invented its own season. People on porches set down their mugs without meaning to. A dog that had been barking at the wind remembered it was domesticated. Kestrel felt the odd sensation of her breath aligning with the pulse of 80 idling engines. She didn't trust anything in this town, not the sheriff's maybes or the neighbor's hose or the way the court papers had bent a child into a signature, but she trusted physics. A wall of sound becomes a wall of safety, and an escort can be a kind of armor. Cricket walked from where she'd been waiting at the gate, helmet tucked under her arm, her hair in 2 blunt braids streaked with gray like lightning had fallen in love with her. She met them at the hinge, at the exact point where sidewalk turns to history, and crouched so she was eye level with Ileana. You ready to show the world how Brave looks? She asked. I guess, Ileana said, because Brave is just Fear's older sister and neither of them needed to pretend otherwise. Cricket stood and looked to Ledger, who nodded. Then she turned to the group and lifted her hand. The line of bikes flanking the sidewalk shut their engines as if obeying a single heartbeat. The sudden quiet pressed on Kestrel's ears until she realized it wasn't silence, not exactly. It was the sound of support rearranging the air so fear had fewer rooms to hide in. They went through the gates. Ileana led, because that mattered. Kestrel followed, because she always would. The riders moved like shadows that had learned choreography, some staying at the entrance to watch the road, others walking in a staggered formation that gave Ileana a lane wide enough to choose her steps. The cemetery smelled like wet bark and old secrets. A hornbeam tree dropped its papery seeds in a slow drift. A family 2 aisles over paused their own grief to look up, then down again, the way people do when reminded that sorrow has neighborhoods and visitors. Kestrel pointed to the far corner where the older stones leaned. "There," she said. "By the oak." Ileana nodded and began the walk across mown grass damp enough to darken her sneakers. With each step, Kestrel felt the useless adrenaline sluice from her veins, leaving something lighter in its place. She realized she had been bracing for an interruption, a voice rising, a threat tossed like a beer bottle, a figure on the periphery trying to reclaim narrative. But the only voices were birds, and the only figures were the ones who had chosen to be guardians instead of witnesses. Halfway to the oak, a man detached himself from a stand of cedars and walked toward them with hands spread as if to show he held no weapons. Kestrel's throat closed. Her body recognized his gait before her mind gave him a name. She did not say it. She would not give him that gift. He was flanked by 2 others whose faces wore the blandness of men who believe consequences are myths. One chewed a toothpick. The other adjusted the bill of his cap like a soldier saluting a rank he didn't respect. Kestrel counted distances, a habit that had never left her. 40 feet. 35. Too close for the deputies' cars in the area. Far enough for a decision to do damage before help looked up from its clipboard. Ledger stepped to his left so his body was between Ileana and the men. Sable did the same on the right. Cricket's voice stayed conversational but acquired an iron filament. "Gentlemen," she said. "The child is visiting a grave. The path you want is over there." She pointed nowhere in particular as if the world offered infinite alternatives to bad choices. The man at the center took one more step. He had the cautious smile of a man who has learned to powder his rage with words he can deny later. "We're just paying respects," he said. His eyes were silver when angry, Kestrel remembered, they made everything look like a coin he could spend. "No," Ileana said. Her voice was sandpaper, small but trying its best to be rock. "You don't pay anything here." Kestrel exhaled a breath she hadn't meant to hold. The riders didn't move. They didn't threaten. They became stillness with edges, the kind that made walking forward feel like a mistake in the making. The man's smile grew thinner. "Look at all this theater," he said, gesturing at the bikes and patches and leather as if the costumes of safety were a personal affront. "What are you going to do? Film us?" "We don't need a camera," Ledger said softly. "We need boundaries." "We have a right," the man said, but the word right sounded strangled in his mouth, as if even language refused to be complicit. Cricket tilted her head. "You have the right to walk away," she said. "Everything else here belongs to her." She nodded at Ileana. The wind lifted the edges of the daisy's cellophane. It crackled like a warning. Kestrel felt her hands wanting to fist and forced them open. She scanned their flanks. A rider she hadn't met, patch reading DOC, had taken up position behind the men, not blocking, just existing in a way that made forward feel less available than it had a moment before. Another rider, small and spare, had moved toward the caretaker's cottage and was speaking into a phone with the unhurried clarity of someone who knew she'd be heard. Ileana walked again. She did not ask permission from Kestrel or apologies from the ground. She walked until she reached the oak that had been dropping fists for a century and placed the bouquet at the foot of a stone whose letters the rain had tried and failed to erase. Kestrel read them the way a paramedic reads unseen numbers, once for accuracy, again for meaning. She felt the old ache like a weather front moving through old injuries. She waited for Ileana's words. "I brought you the bright ones," Ileana said to the ground. "I know you like the bright ones." With the voice of a child who had been instructed the truth and found it heavy but carryable, she told the earth about her math test and the way the new music teacher made the clarinets sound like bees inside a jar, and how Kestrel had tried to bake cornbread last week and turn the apartment into a fire drill they both couldn't stop laughing at. She told the ground about the laughter on Rooker Street, too. Her mouth trembled when she described it. Kestrel kept her eyes on the stone because looking at the living would break her. When Ileana finished, she pressed her palm flat to the top of the stone like she was checking a forehead for fever. "I'm going to be okay," she said. "I have people." "Yes," Cricket said from 3 feet away. "You do." The men by the cedars hadn't moved, but the air around them had. Words had been said in the kind of tone that rearranges options, and now they stood like subtraction problems waiting to be solved. The one with the toothpick spit it into his palm and looked at it as if surprised it no longer belonged in his mouth. "We're done here," the central man said finally, but he said it to his shoes. They turned as a trio. The riders didn't cheer or taunt. They watched the way ER nurses watch a patient's color return, professionally, with relief they keep mostly private. Kestrel felt the release the way a clasp releases, a tiny click, and then you remember to move. She knelt beside Ileana and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "Do you want a minute alone?" Ileana shook her head. "Stay." She rounded the stone with a small determined step and sat in the wet grass, legs crossed, palms up on her knees like someone who had watched meditation videos and wanted now to try their medicine. The hem of her jeans wicked water. She didn't care. She closed her eyes. Ledger murmured something to Sable and stepped back to give them the width of a small bedroom. Cricket checked the line of bikes at the gate, the perimeters, the perches from which trouble might grow. She moved like weather that had decided to be useful. "Hi," someone whispered. A girl about Ileana's age stood 2 stones over, her hair in braids that had been slept in, her sweatshirt declaring a team she may or may not have tried out for. "I'm Tansy," she said, offering the name like a promise not to turn it into a weapon. "My grandmother's there." She pointed to a granite slab that gleamed newer than the others. "I like your flowers." "Thanks," Ileana said without opening her eyes. "You can sit if you want." Tansy lowered herself carefully then, as if the grass might complain. She kept her hands tucked into her sleeves like a bird keeps its feet warm. "They always stare when I come," she whispered. "Like I'm stealing something." Ileana opened her eyes. "We're not," she said. "No," Tansy agreed. She nodded toward the bikes. "They came once for me. When it was bad." Ileana's eyebrows climbed. "They did?" Tansy smiled, small. "I got a pendant." She reached beneath her sweatshirt and pulled out a cord with a stamped metal disc that glowed like a coin in a magician's palm. It had an emblem etched into it, a wheel, a shield. "They told me it means I have family even when I don't have." She stopped the sentence where it was still manageable. "It's heavy." "In a good way." Ileana touched the pendant with the back of one finger, as if it were a cat she wanted to greet politely. "It feels like a door handle." Tansy nodded. "Yeah. Like you could grab it and run through." Cricket watched the girls and did not interrupt what was forming. Some rescues arrived on 2 wheels. Others arrived quietly and changed the weather without thunder. The caretaker's cottage door opened and a man in a blue shirt with a name patch, Ernest, stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag as if grief left grease. He raised a palm toward Cricket. "Deputy says he's 2 minutes out." "You good?" "We're good," Cricket said. Her voice made the words true. "Thanks, Ernest." Ernest nodded and looked toward Ileana with a tenderness that made him seem younger by 10 years. "Take your time, sweetheart," he called. "No rush here." He went back inside and the screen door, in a better mood than the others on Willow Street, eased itself shut without complaint. Kestrel stayed kneeling until her knees began to chatter. She stood then, slow to avoid turning softness into spectacle. She scanned again, gates, cedars, periphery, sky. The cloud cover was breaking where the highway cut a seam through town. Across that seam, on the ridge by the water tower, someone stood, a solitary figure, a jacket too light for the season, a posture that pretended it was unobserved. Kestrel felt the old blade settle along her sternum again. She inhaled through her nose and tasted metal. Ledger followed the angle of her eyes. Without asking, he slid his phone from his pocket, tapped twice, and said, "Doc, North Ridge, near the H in the water tower logo." He slipped the phone away as if he'd just checked the time. "We see him," he told Kestrel. "We don't let him write the next sentence." Kestrel exhaled through her teeth. "Thank you," she said, and meant it more deeply than the words themselves could carry. By the time the deputy's cruiser rolled past the gate, lights silent, just the blue-red color of official attention, Doc had already climbed the ridge and found a path to the water tower's service road. The deputy gave a small wave that meant "I'm here" and also means "I don't know what to do with any of this." Cricket returned it with a nod that meant "We know. We plan anyway." When Ileana finally stood, grass impressions etched their thready map into the back of her calves. She touched the stone once more with the tips of 2 fingers, an unpracticed benediction, and breathed like she had learned something new about air. "Ready," she said. Ledger gestured a question with his eyebrows. "Back the way we came?" Ileana surprised them by pointing down a different aisle toward a row of saplings staked with green rubber bands. "Can we go that way?" "We can go any way you want," Cricket said. They moved as a unit, the bikes outside the fence gunning to life in a muted chorus that felt less like a startle and more like a vow. As they reached the center path, the freckled boy reappeared at the entrance, half hid behind the gatepost. This time, he didn't laugh. He watched Ileana the way a person watches a storm they don't understand, spooked, a little reverent, unsure whether to run or stand very still. Ileana paused. She looked at him in the unblinking way children can, and he looked back. The rider named Sable leaned subtly so her patch caught the boy's eye, a wheel and a shield. Words stitched beneath, "No child deserves to live in fear." The boy swallowed. His face unknotted. He didn't speak. He simply pushed his hands into his hoodie pocket and stared at his shoes like he'd found a truth there he hadn't known he carried. On the far side of the cemetery, near the columbarium, the solitary figure from the ridge materialized uphill and began walking down, hands in the pockets of his jacket, head tilted in a theatrical angle of grievance. Kestrel saw him and felt heat flood her limbs. The deputy at the gate saw him too and stepped into the aisle, palm extended. The man kept coming. The wind decided to stop for a better angle. "Stay with me," Kestrel whispered to Ileana, but the girl was already a step ahead, chin up, eyes on the exit, a small boat navigating a narrow channel carved for her by 80 engines and the stubborn love of strangers who refused to remain strangers. The man from the ridge reached the first row of stones and lifted his chin like a compass needle finding north. "I have words," he announced to the trees, to the ground, to whoever would accept them. Cricket's voice did not lift. "Not here," she said. "Not to her." The deputy's hand hovered near his belt as if the law were a skittish animal he might spook. Sable rolled her shoulders like someone who could lift a couch by herself. Ledger's helmet visor snapped down with a click that sounded like a decision. The wind ate the next sentence before anyone could hear it, all except the last word, which rang clear as glass: "Today." Kestrel took a step she had not planned. Ileana's hand found hers, small and dry, the bones bird-light but resolute. The aisle narrowed where the gravestones leaned in close. The air gathered itself and waited. And then, from the street beyond the gate, a new sound rose, not engines, not sirens, but voices, dozens of them, layered and low, a hum that built like a hymn taught to people who didn't grow up singing. It moved toward the cemetery with the patience of weather and the intent of a promise, and when it reached the iron gate it didn't stop. It poured in. And this story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. The world lunged with her. A motorcycle ghosted between the stroller and the curb, bars wide, pipes huffing heat into the winter air. The rider's boot kissed asphalt and the machine set itself like a big animal trained to block a door. The front wheel drew a hard line. The man with the knuckle duster blinked, momentum checking against metal and intention. "Line holds," Bishop said over his shoulder without raising his voice. The words weren't for drama, they were instructions, a ritual spoken out loud so nobody could mistake it. Lennox's palm covered the stroller's handle. Maris felt that weight like a blessing on a fevered forehead. She moved a half step, putting her hip between the wheel and the curb. Ria's breathing piped fast and high, Captain Clementine's stitched smile stared at the middle distance like a veteran. Officer Sue came on from the bench with that efficient acceleration cops use when they've already decided the next 3 actions. "Sir." "Drop the brass," she said to the man with the knuckle duster. "Now." Phone guy kept filming. He edged sideways, hunting angles, the predatory curiosity of someone who treats people like content. "Public space," he said brightly to no one in particular. "We're documenting a gang intimidation." His lens found Maris, panned to the stroller, skated along the leather vests as if they were evidence. Bishop stepped so the camera saw his patch and his eyes in the same frame. "Document this," he said evenly. A family line, a police officer's lawful order, and a man with a weapon walking toward a child. Knuckle Duster sneered, but the sneer had gone dry. He looked at the ring of bikes and boots, at the officer's stance and the tidy rectangle of her radio on her shoulder. He saw a future with bars in it. He dropped the brass. It hit asphalt with a sound like a coin that won't bounce. Phone guy's lens dipped to catch it. The third man, mouthy, took a half step as if to kick it back toward his friend and thought better of it when 3 quiet men in vests blinked into existence between desire and stupidity. "Hands," Sue said. Palms blossomed reluctantly. She cuffed Knuckle Duster with calm muscle memory and called out a code that moved squad cars across town like chess pieces. When the cuffs ratcheted, Rhea's breath lengthened. The band on the folding stage found its nerve again and teased a chord that sounded like exhale. The bakery tent resumed selling sugar to fear-shaken hands. Phone guy kept narrating, aiming for righteous. "Illegal detention," he announced as if Latin would arrive to back him up if he said the spell right. "Targeting a citizen." "You're free to stand over there and be loud," Sue said without looking at him, nodding to a patch of pavement safely far from the stroller. "If you step into this corridor again, you join your friend." He edged back, queasy with bravado. Mouthy glowered like a hobby. The angle hunt resumed. Bishop stayed at Maris's side but not in her way. "You okay?" he asked, and the word okay did not mean "are you fine, stop making a fuss," it meant "do your knees work, do your lungs remember?" Maris nodded. Words were not the right tool just yet. She put her palm flat on the stroller canopy as if it were a heart monitor. Rhea peered out, solemn. "The Fox is brave," she reported. "The Fox is a union," Lennox said softly, and for reasons she couldn't have explained, that almost made Maris cry. Squad cars slid in. Officers took statements in efficient circles, Sue briefed and clipped phrases, Bishop in complete sentences, Lennox with a detail that made the picture unarguable, the brand of the brass knuckles, their weight in her hand when she lifted them for the evidence bag. Phone guy filmed from the safety square, his voice climbed an octave when an officer asked for his name. When the cars eased away with Knuckle Duster in the back seat and Mouthy persuaded by paperwork to leave, the parking lot shivered and then resumed being a toy drive. That's what communities do when the storm leaves, they pick up the tent lines and they keep going. Bishop blew warmth into his cupped hands and turned his head slightly toward Maris. "You're about to shake," he said. "That's biology, not opinion. Let it." She did. It wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of shake that starts in the wrists and makes your teeth click once like a polite knock. She stood through it with her jaw loose and her knees unlocked the way a yoga teacher on YouTube had once instructed. When it passed, she could feel the ground again. "Crowley called," she said, as if the rest of them had not been there for the conversation. "Said I'd be served." "We heard," Lennox said. "We've danced with him before. He likes people who don't have time to fight." "We do." Bishop's eyes tracked the lot, the crowd, the place's trouble could bloom again. "We'll loop counsel," he said. "We don't play lawyer on TV. We hire one with a boring tie and a good file system. I don't have money for." "You have us," Lennox said. "Different currency." Something in Maris that had been braced against every bill, every notice, every administrative cruelty, loose in one click. She hated needing. But there is a shame that comes from lack and a different one that comes from refusing help until you break. One of them is survivable. "Okay," she said. Okay. They returned to the work at hand: tins for donations, a raffle for a kid-sized bike, a line for cocoa. Sue hovered nearby, a civilian drink in her hand again, her radio live whether she sipped or not. She gave Maris a card with a handwritten number on the back. "Personal cell," she said. "Don't hand it out. Use it." By late afternoon, the toy mountain had grown ridiculous, an avalanche of plush and plastic hope. Rhea fell asleep in the stroller with Captain Clementine tucked under her chin like a life jacket. The winter sun went low and made the lot look like an oil painting of a place where nothing bad had ever happened. That's when a process server arrived. He was not dramatic. He was a man in a wool coat with paperwork in a white envelope, moving through the world with the weary efficiency of someone who asks for directions a lot. He found Maris by asking a volunteer in a Santa hat, then a cop, then a biker. He approached with the envelope held like a tray. "Ms. Calder?" She could have said no. Pride likes to play hide-and-seek with paper. But there are games you lose by pretending not to be home. "Yes," she said. He held out the envelope. "You've been served." The words were a ritual. They didn't have to be theater to count. She took the envelope. It had weight like a sandwich. On the flap, a small smear of printer ink looked like a bruise. "What is it?" Bishop asked. Maris slid a finger under the seal. "Restraining order," she said. "Hearing Monday. He says I attacked him. He's asking the court to keep me away from the mall, from him, from the toy drive." Her laugh came out wrong. "From Coco." Sue took the papers and scanned with cop speed. "Ex parte temporary order," she said. "Judge signed as a placeholder. Will contest at the hearing. I'll file a report with video and witness statements. The temporary terms say you can't contact him, which you haven't, and you have to stay 100 yards away, which you were already trying to do." She looked at Bishop. "You have counsel on call?" "We do," he said. "Keller." Civil side. "Good," Sue said. "Have him file a response by tomorrow. I'll send my report to both counsel. We'll ask for sanctions for bad faith if the judge has the backbone." Maris stared at the paper and felt the old familiar tilt, the one where a wrong thing with a stamp on it wants to become the truth. She looked at Rhea's sleeping face. Weight recalibrated. "Okay," she repeated, and somewhere in the repetition the word turned into a plan. They packed the toy drive at dusk. The lot hummed with that exhausted contentment communities earn by doing work together. Bishop loaded boxes with the practiced back of a man who had done manual labor enough to respect it. Lennox checked the list twice, old habit and new tradition. Sue handed out small jokes like gum to keep jaws busy and minds from chewing their own tails. Bishop and Lennox walked Maris to the bus stop again. The sky was the bruised purple of cities at dinner. A light snow began, the kind that makes each lamp into a halo. "Monday," Bishop said. "Courthouse at 9. "I don't have a sitter," Maris said. "We'll handle it," Lennox said. "Nomad runs a quiet room at the clubhouse. Coloring books, good snacks, a guy named Raoul who can fix any toy in the world with a screwdriver and 2 zip ties. We'll watch Rhea while you talk to the judge." "Are you serious?" Maris asked, because the answer mattered more than she wanted to admit. Lennox gave her a look that could deadlift a car. "Woman, we are serious about 3 things: food, kids, and not letting bullies build personality around it." Maris laughed, the good kind this time. "Okay," she said again. "Then I'll be serious about showing up." Monday at 9 looked like a line of humans with paperwork in winter breath. The courthouse had that beige hush that insists on manners. Bishop in a pressed black shirt, patches covered by a plain jacket that somehow made him look more dangerous, because kindness in uniform is one thing, kindness in a suit says you're multi-tool dangerous. Lennox wore a blazer over her vest, a quiet joke with a steel punchline: "You can address the court and keep your colors under your clothes." Keller introduced himself with a handshake that was warm and dry. "Civil defense," he said. "I speak fluent bureaucracy and a little human." He knelt to Rhea's level and stage whispered, We have a snack emporium down the hall with your name on it. Rhea considered. Do they have strawberries? An entire parliamentary caucus of strawberries, Keller said solemnly. He led her toward the waiting nomad babysitters, an uncle-level phalanx that smelled like leather and cinnamon gum. Court called. People rose. The judge wore the face of a man who had seen a lot and would see more. Crowley sat at the petitioner's table with a tie the color of a bruise and a client who looked less like a monster in fluorescent light and more like a man whose days had been losing bets. Crowley opened with practiced injury. Your Honor, this is a straightforward request. My client was assaulted in a public place by the respondent. He gestured toward Maris with a flourish that tried to make her sound like a bad weather system, who then mobilized an outlaw motorcycle gang to menace him when he attempted to shop at an event open to the public. His voice found a whine and polished it into a violin. Keller stood with the unshowy competence of a man who had decided suits were just armor in a different fabric. Your Honor, the evidence will show that the petitioner initiated contact with a minor's property, escalated when the child's mother attempted to retrieve the item, and returned the next day in violation of police instruction, accompanied by individuals carrying an illegal weapon. Multiple videos corroborate this. We will be seeking sanctions for the filing of a bad faith petition. The judge steepled his fingers. Videos? 3 angles, Keller said. Mall security. A bystander. And, ironically, the petitioner's associate, who uploaded his footage for likes. He held up a tablet. We've marked each exhibit and provided the court and opposing counsel with copies. Crowley's jaw tightened. The context speaks for itself, the judge said mildly. Let's look. They watched. The footage was what Maris had lived through, stripped of adrenaline and presented in the clinical light of pixels, the inside-out sweatshirt, the hand on the fox, the way Maris's fingers found the man's wrist not to harm but to take back what belonged to a child. The next day, the approach, the brass knuckles caught in the silver eye of the camera, Sue's calm orders, the arrest. On mute, the whole thing looked like choreography, a waltz with a beginning and a resolution and a few ugly steps in the middle. Crowley shifted. My client was intoxicated, he offered, as if that were an alibi that made the physics reverse. The judge sighed the sigh of a man who had learned the hard way that people will try any door. Sir, he said to Ricard, did the police advise you to avoid contact after the first incident? Ricard stared at the tabletop as if it might sprout mercy. Yes. And did you return to the site the next day? He worked his jaw. Yes. With associates, one of whom carried a prohibited weapon? Silence is sometimes a sentence. The judge wrote something on a pad. The temporary order is dissolved, he said. The petition is denied. Counsel for respondent may submit a motion for fees and sanctions. I will consider. He looked at Maris finally, and there was something like apology in his eyes, thin but real. Miss Calder, you may go. Relief is a physical event. Maris felt it as heat under the sternum, as an uncinching around the spine. She kept her face steady because the room still had Crowley in it and pride had not abandoned its post entirely. Outside the courtroom, Bishop let out a slow breath that was almost a laugh. Lennox grinned without teeth. Keller shook Maris's hand like sealing a contract with a friend. We'll file for fees, he said. You shouldn't pay to defend yourself from nonsense. Thank you, she said, and meant the you as plural. They retrieved Rhea from the quiet room where Raoul had indeed repaired a toddler's robot with a screwdriver and 2 zip ties. Rhea presented Captain Clementine for inspection. The judge says we're brave, she informed the Fox, which is how stories improve in retelling. The rest of the week was meant to be quiet. Life tried to reassert itself with laundry and job applications and the algebra of budgets. But trouble does not leave a life merely because it has been told to get out. It slinks around the back, it tests windows. On Thursday, a flyer went up in Ridgeview's laundry room, a cropped still from the worst frame of the worst video, Maris mid-grimace, the stroller wheel at a severe angle that made it look like carelessness instead of physics. Below the image, black letters, child endangerment. You decide. with a link to a website where people who thought opinions were facts could vote. Maris found it while loading a dryer and stood with a sock in her hand, the world tilting again. A neighbor with a laundry basket and a tired ponytail glanced from the flyer to Maris's face and said softly, "People are cruel when they're bored." She peeled the tape and tore the paper into neat quarters. "We clean up after each other. That's how this place works." That night, Bishop texted, "We've seen it. Don't feed it. We'll handle counter-messaging, toys, kids, cocoa. Truth travels slower but arrives cleaner." Lennox sent a photo, the toy mountain now stacked inside the community center gym, a ridiculous slope of generosity. "Look at this avalanche. This is the algorithm I subscribe to. Officer Sue, late, we've opened a harassment file. Document everything. Also, how's Ria's fox doing?" "Stalwart," Maris typed. She took a photo of Captain Clementine sitting on the couch between two pillows and sent it. The fox looked like a dignitary at a summit. On Friday morning, a black SUV idled across from Ridgeview's gate. No plates up front. Tinted windows too dark for the law. Maris watched from the crack in her blinds and felt that thin wire of fear string her ribs. She texted Sue without preamble, "Black SUV across the street. No front plate. On my way," came back faster than physics. The SUV pulled off before Sue arrived, because that is what cowards do. But Sue cruised the block anyway and then came up for tea, standing in Maris's small kitchen with her hat tucked under her arm like a visiting aunt. "You're not overreacting," she said, as if answering a question Maris had not asked aloud. "Stay with people. Text me when you leave and when you return." That evening the clubhouse opened its yard for a family night. Someone hung string lights, someone else grilled. Children ran everywhere like purposeful chaos. A woman named June with a soft Arkansas vowel loaned Maris a coat because she could tell the little blue one wasn't cutting it. "You're in the circle now," June said. "Rule 1, nobody's cold." Ria acquired a tiny denim vest with a patch that read Little Thunder. She stood very straight when Bishop presented it like a graduation. "It doesn't mean you ride," Lennox told her gravely. "It means you help." They stayed late enough for Maris to watch how night shifts on a yard full of protective people, the way laughter adds a perimeter, the way headlights are noticed, not just seen. She felt the weight of being watched over and realized she had been carrying its absence for years without naming it. She put a hand on her own chest and felt something like a returning. On Saturday morning, the knock came. 3 knuckles, polite, then a professional pause. Maris checked the peephole and swallowed. Crowley stood there, alone, hands visible, a practiced half-smile that had probably persuaded many people he meant well. She opened the door the length of the chain. "You can speak through the gap," she said. "Or you can go away." "Miss Calder," he said, as if greeting a juror. "I'm not here to argue. I'm here to make a practical proposal." "No," she said. The word arrived from the place inside that had learned to trust first instincts. "Whatever it is." "No." He blinked, recalibrated, smiled again like a man who admired himself for being unflappable. "You are very certain for someone in your position." "What position is that?" she asked. "Mother? Tenant? Woman who held a line while your client tried to make content out of her kid?" He gave her a look he probably used on people who owed money. "You have a history, Ms. Calder. A past employer who didn't keep you on. A brother who's been in and out of trouble. A move across state lines with no forwarding address for 6 months." He lifted a shoulder, not a shrug so much as a small threat stretching. "I can make that mean anything I need to." Her hands were steady. "And you will try," she said. "But I have a community. And a cop who drinks tea in my kitchen. And a kid whose fox has more courage than you. Pride as a virtue is not glamorous. It is small and stainless and fits in the palm." She held it up between them like a mirror. Crowley's smile thinned. "This could have been easier," he said, which is the sentence bullies use when their favorite toys stop working. "It will be hard," she said. "And then it will be over." She closed the door. The chain clicked, a tiny decisive sound that rang much larger inside her bones. She texted Sue. He came to the door. TSK to him, Sue returned. I'll log. Keep your chain. Little Thunder okay? Learning to scowl, Maris typed, including a photo of Rhea practicing a comic mean face in the mirror while Captain Clementine looked on like a patient coach. Sunday was volunteer day at the community center, sorting donations, boxing hats and coats, making piles that had the quiet power of arithmetic done right. Bishop ran logistics like a freight yard foreman. Lennox ran the room like a teacher whose entire pedagogy was you matter and we're not wasting time. Maris ran a table where kids picked one toy for themselves and one to give to the center's free store, and she watched how generosity looks in a child's hands, small and absolute. Mid-afternoon, a man walked in wearing a mall security jacket and the kind of humility that means you've come to confess something that might save somebody's future. He introduced himself as Carlos. I was on shift that day, he said to Maris. I didn't do enough. I went home and felt like I took a bath in cowardice. I put together a clip from our cameras. Angles that show the first moment. If your lawyer wants it. Keller wanted it. He arrived in 20 minutes with a drive and a thank you that sounded like it had a bow on it. We'll attach to the sanctions motion, he said. And to the complaint I'm about to file with the bar. He gave Carlos a card with a number on it that opens doors for people who pick courage late. If you get blowback, call me. Crowley filed nothing that week. The site with the laundry room flyer poll stopped accepting votes and started selling t-shirts and then learned what cease and desist letters feel like. The SUV did not return, and if it did, the yard would have recorded its plate and sent it to a group chat that could mobilize a dozen pairs of boots to walk a woman to her door with stories in their pockets. On Wednesday, Sue rang the bell and came up carrying a file folder and a box of bakery strawberries. Evidence and vitamins, she said. Pick your courage. She sat and drank tea and told Maris, in plain language, what would happen next. Charges against Knuckle Duster proceeding. Crowley under bar review for the nuisance petition. Ricard referred to a diversion program that would either help him or not. If not, the system would remember his name the next time it needed to. You did everything right, Sue said finally. You protected your kid, you accepted help, you told the truth. That's the trifecta. I shook, Maris said, as if confessing a weak verb. Shaking is the receipt, Sue said. Proof you paid attention to your life while it was happening. Rhea fed Captain Clementine a strawberry with grave ceremony. I'm teaching her to be brave, she told Sue. You're doing a good job, Sue said, and if she blinked more than usual, nobody mentioned it. That weekend the club hosted one last event at the community center gym, a thank you night. Parents, kids, volunteers, cops, bakers, security guards who had had a hard talk with themselves. Someone hung a banner that read, "We stood a line." Someone else set up a mic on the stage. Bishop was not a man who liked microphones, but he took one and made it sound like a conversation at a kitchen table. We do loud, he said, and we do quiet. Loud as motorcycles and music and telling someone with brass knuckles to put them down. Quiet as rides to court, babysitting, cocoa, boring paperwork that keeps bullies honest. Loud gets the headlines. Quiet changes whether a kid believes the world has adults in it. He nodded to Maris where she stood at the edge of the stage with Rhea on her hip. Sometimes strangers become your people, he said. Sometimes you become someone else's. That's the work. The gym applauded in the sloppy, perfect way of communities who are not performing for judges. Lennox stepped up, took the mic, and grinned. We got one more thing, she said. For a member of Little Thunder who kept her line under pressure. She beckoned. Rhea hid her face in Maris's shoulder, then peeped with interest when Lennox produced a tiny patch from her pocket, a bright fox stitched in orange thread. For bravery in the face of nonsense, Lennox said solemnly, and pinned it to the Little Thunder vest with practiced hands. Rhea sat up very straight. Captain Clementine approves, she announced into the mic Lennox held, and the gym howled the happy kind of howl that shakes ceilings in ways landlords don't understand. After, they ate cake on paper plates. People told each other about dogs and jobs and small victories that don't look like anything until you count them up. Bishop showed Rhea how to touch a motorcycle without touching the hot parts. Lennox taught Maris the trick of tying a scarf so it refuses the wind. Sue laughed real laughter in the company of people who expected her to be human first, badge second. Maris stood in the doorway of the gym at the end of the night and watched the room begin to unpeople, the way spaces do when an event has poured itself out. June squeezed her arm and said, "You look taller." "I feel held," Maris said, tasting the word like something rare. "You are," June said. "Now you hold other people. That's the toll." They walked out under a sky that had decided to be kind. The parking lot was ordinary again, puddles, a shopping cart someone would push back tomorrow, a banner sagging in the wind and somehow looking like it had done good work. Maris buckled Rhea into the booster and looked up to find Bishop beside her. He tapped the roof of the car lightly, a driver's blessing. "You got our numbers," he said. "I do," she said. "And you've got mine." They smiled the smile of people who were not done knowing each other. On Monday, a white envelope slid under her door. Not the ugly kind this time. Handwriting she didn't recognize, careful and a little old-fashioned, like the person had learned on paper instead of screens. Inside, a letter on cheap stationery. "Ms. Calder. I am Carlos's mother. He told me what happened. He told me he wished he had done more, sooner. I work in the cafeteria at the elementary school on Peach Street. We have a kid there who is having a rough patch. If you have time, would you come read your girl's favorite book to our kinders on Thursday? They need to see a brave mom. They need to see a fox. P.S. We have strawberries at snack." Maris sat at the small kitchen table and let herself cry in the good way, quiet and full of air. She texted the group, Bishop, Lennox, Sue, Keller, June, Raoul with the zip ties, because that's what you do when your life has grown more people than you ever expected it could hold. Thursday, she wrote. Kindergarten. Fox story. Strawberries. Thumbs up and hearts came back. A string of motorcycle emojis that looked like a parade. She took Rhea's hand in Captain Clementine's ear and walked to the window. The parking lot below was just a geometry again, but she knew where the lines had been held. She knew who would stand there again if asked. Then her phone vibrated with a number she didn't recognize. Not Crowley. Not a spam. An unknown with local digits. She almost let it go, then answered because she had decided silence was not the right tool anymore. "Ms. Calder?" A woman's voice, soft and crisp. "My name is Dora Ricard. I'm," a small breath, like a person stepping into cold water, "his sister. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what he did. I can't fix him. But I can tell you something you need to know." Maris's hand closed around the phone until the case creaked. The air above the stove felt thin. "I'm listening," she said. Dora's voice trembled and then steadied, as if holding itself by the elbows. "That lawyer. Crowley, he's paid by someone who wants footage. They troll for it. They pick fights with people who look like they can't afford to fight back. My brother was their errand. He thinks it was his idea. It wasn't. They film and they sell the mess." Maris's mind made quick math, the camera in the lot, the flyer pole, the SUV, the sudden swarm. A business model built on bruises. "Do you have proof?" she asked, and she heard Bishop and Lennox in her voice, the way community changes your default settings. "I have emails," Dora said quickly, a rush that sounded like someone who had been waiting to exhale for months. "Screenshots. A contract. If I send them to you, will you give them to that cop who drinks tea?" Maris closed her eyes for a second and saw Sue's hat on her counter, steam from a cup rising like a tiny weather system. She opened them. "Yes," she said. "Send them. Right now. You did the right thing. My mother says that sometimes you have to stand near someone who knows where the line is," Dora said in a small voice. I think you know. I learned, Maris said. I had teachers. She hung up and the apartment felt electrified with the kind of fear that is also purpose. She texted Sue in all caps, "Call me. Evidence." And then sent the screenshots as they landed, emails with subject lines like engagement opportunities, bullet points about escalation capture, dollar amounts next to phrases that translated to human damage. Sue called in under a minute. "We're opening a case," she said, voice clipped and alive. "We're going to burn their business model down to the screws." Maris looked at Rhea, who held Captain Clementine up like a victory pennant. Outside, the world had the same winter light it had yesterday. Inside, the math had changed again. "Tell me where to stand," Maris said, and the line went quiet for a beat before Sue said, "Right where you are. We'll come to you." The knock that followed was not Crowley's. It was a rush of boots in a hallway, the good kind, the thunder she recognized now as a weather that meant protection. She opened the door and the day tilted toward a new fight she hadn't known she was hungry to take on. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.